The room looked ready for joy. Soft ribbons hung from the ceiling like gentle sighs. Pastel balloons swayed in the slow hum of the ceiling fan, and sunlight spilled across the table where tiny shoes sat. Impossibly small, impossibly perfect. Everything was calm, warm, and meant to feel safe, but inside her chest, there was a tremor. Not fear exactly, something quieter, like the flutter of a memory that refused to settle. She had spent the morning arranging things just so, folding napkins, lining up cupcakes, smiling at her reflection as if to reassure herself that everything was fine. That joy this time would stay. Her phone sat face down on the counter. She had sent the message hours ago. Baby shower is this Saturday at 3. It was short, polite, meant for her parents and her sister. The kind of message that carries no emotion, but hides all of it. Every few minutes, she'd glance at the screen, pretending not to hope for a reply. The group chat blinked with silence, until finally one vibration broke through. Her sister's name. The message was small. Just one line. Didn't think we'd be invited. She read it twice, maybe 3 times, as if more reading might change the meaning. It didn't. The words sat there, cool, distant, but alive. It wasn't anger that rose in her. It was something heavier, a soft ache that reached back through time, touching all the years when they hadn't spoken. She tried to keep her hands busy, adjusting flowers, checking the playlist, but every movement carried that sentence like a weight. Didn't think we'd be invited. Somewhere between folding another napkin and straightening a picture frame, her breath caught. Maybe it wasn't an accusation. Maybe it was a question. She wanted to write back, to say, of course you were, or I still care, or please come. But her fingers hovered and fell still. The balloons trembled above her, brushing against each other like whispers in an empty church. Outside, a faint wind rustled through the trees, scattering petals across the porch. For a moment, the air felt like it did years ago, before the distance, before the words they never took back. She looked around the room again. So full of color, so full of celebration, and yet somehow, quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you realize joy can tremble too. She sat down, her hands resting on her stomach, feeling the soft rhythm of new life beneath her palms, and beneath the laughter she imagined would fill this house. There was a question she couldn't shake. How do you welcome new beginnings when old wounds are still waiting by the door? There was a time when the house didn't know silence, when mornings began with the smell of toasted bread, the clatter of plates, and her sister's laughter tumbling through the kitchen like sunlight through an open window. They used to race to the breakfast table, both barefoot, the floor cool beneath their feet. Their mother would scold them gently for arguing over who got the bigger slice of mango, and their father would pretend not to notice, hiding a smile behind his newspaper. Those were the sounds of home. Simple, ordinary moments, the kind you never think to hold on to, because you believe they'll always be there. Her sister was older, louder, braver, the kind of girl who spoke her mind, even when no one asked her to. She used to braid the narrator's hair, tight and careful, whispering secrets that meant everything back then. They promised never to grow apart. But promises made in childhood don't understand the way life stretches people. Gently at first, then until they can barely see each other. It started small. Different schools, different friends, little misunderstandings that no one ever explained, just left to grow in the quiet corners between them. And then came the bigger things. The years when her sister left home early, chasing a life that didn't fit inside their small town. The narrator stayed, the steady one, the helper, the one who kept the rhythm of the house steady after everyone else moved to a different beat. Her parents would talk about her sister sometimes, with pride, but also with a sigh that carried both love and distance. She's busy, they'd say. She'll call soon. But soon began to mean years. Still, every holiday, the narrator would set an extra plate at the table. Just in case, even when she stopped believing her sister might show up, she couldn't stop making room for her. Then their father got sick, and silence became a language everyone spoke too fluently. She remembered sitting beside his bed, the sound of the oxygen machine filling the spaces where words should have been. Her sister called once, just once. The call was brief, awkward, the kind of conversation that ends before either person is ready, but neither knows how to keep it going. When their father passed, grief didn't bring them together. It turned them into strangers with the same memories. The funeral was quiet. Her sister stood at the back, sunglasses on even though it was raining. They exchanged a hug that felt more like a habit than comfort, and when her sister left that evening, no one said, "See you soon." That was the last time they saw each other. The years that followed were a blur of holidays spent pretending. Birthdays celebrated without calls, and family photos carefully cropped to hide absences. Sometimes, at night, she'd scroll through her phone, looking at her sister's life through glowing screens. Vacations, friends, a new city, a new job. She wanted to reach out, to say something small, but every time she typed a message, it felt too late. Too much time had passed. Too many things had gone unsaid, so she waited. And in waiting, she built her own kind of distance. It wasn't anger that kept her away. It was pride and pain, and the quiet fear that maybe her sister didn't miss her at all. Years slipped by that way, soft, uneventful, and heavy with everything left unsaid. Until one afternoon, she found their old family album while packing for her move. The pages had grown yellow around the edges, but the smiles inside were still young, still untouched by time. She stopped on one picture, the two of them at the beach, holding seashells up to their ears, pretending to hear the ocean. They looked so close, so sure that nothing could change them. She traced her finger along her sister's face and whispered, "I wish we'd tried harder." It was the first time she had said it out loud, that night. She dreamed of home. Not the house as it was now, but how it used to sound. The radio playing softly in the background, her mother humming along, her sister calling her name from the hallway. When she woke up, the echo lingered. Maybe that's how love fades. Not with shouting, not with anger, but with the slow forgetting of each other's voices. And yet, beneath that forgetting, something still lived, a small, stubborn ember of love that refused to die out completely. Years later, when she finally sent that baby shower message, she wasn't just inviting family. She was inviting the past, hoping that maybe, somehow love remembered its way back home. The message came in the quietest hour of the afternoon, the kind of stillness that makes every vibration of your phone feel louder than it should. She saw her sister's name light up the screen, and for a second her breath caught. The words were few, almost careless. Didn't think we'd be invited, that was all. No greeting, no smile, no warmth tucked between the letters. Just 7 words that carried years of silence and misunderstanding. She read it once. Then again, and again. At first she felt that old ache, the one that used to rise whenever her sister's name was mentioned. A quiet defense, a wall built out of self-protection and unspoken grief. But this time something in her shifted. The words didn't sound angry. They sounded unsure, as if her sister didn't know if she still belonged. She held her phone in her hands, staring at the screen as the room seemed to grow heavier around her. The pastel decorations, the little shoes, the ribbons, everything that was meant to be joyful now looked fragile, almost guilty under the soft light. She thought about how easily joy could turn into fear, how the thought of someone not showing up could make even balloons feel like reminders of absence. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She started typing, "Of course you're invited. I wanted you there." Then she stopped, deleted it. She didn't know what to say. How do you reach across years of quiet with just a few words? How do you invite someone back into your life when you're not sure they want to be there? She placed the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken, that kind of pale gray that carries rain before it falls. The street was empty, the world muted. It felt like even the air was waiting for something to happen. That night, she couldn't sleep. The rain began softly, like a memory returning. Each drop against the window sounded like a heartbeat, steady, persistent, familiar. It reminded her of another night. Years ago, the last time they had spoken before everything went quiet. It had rained then too. Voices raised, words thrown without care, things said not because they were true, but because they hurt. And when it was over, there was no apology, just silence, the kind of silence that outlives every reason it began. Now, lying awake, she wondered what her sister was doing. Whether she'd typed the message in hesitation, deleting and rewriting it like she just had. Maybe she was scared too. Maybe those 7 words were her own trembling version of reaching out. The thought softened her. Sometimes love hides inside awkward sentences. Sometimes, didn't think we'd be invited, really means I wish you still wanted me there. By morning, the rain had stopped. The world outside shimmered faintly, washed clean, smelling of damp earth and renewal. She made herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, phone beside her. The decision came quietly, not as a burst of courage, but as a calm knowing. She opened her messages again. Typed slowly, her heart steady this time. Of course you're invited. I'd really like you to come. No explanations. No apologies. Just an open door. She sent it before she could overthink it, then sat there, watching the message travel across invisible distance, across years, guilt, and fear toward someone who might or might not answer. And in that small act, she felt something unclench inside her. It wasn't peace, not yet. But it was movement, a stirring, gentle and uncertain, like the first ripple across still water after a long, windless night. That day, she didn't hear back. And that was okay, because for the first time in years, she realized healing doesn't always come with responses. Sometimes it begins the moment you stop waiting for one. She looked around the room again, at the balloons, the small cradle, the folded baby clothes. They no longer felt like decorations for a party. They felt like symbols of a life being rebuilt. One soft step, one message, one moment at a time. By evening, the sunlight broke through the clouds, landing across the living room floor in wide, gentle strokes. She watched the dust shimmer in the light and thought, maybe this is how forgiveness begins, not in grand gestures, but in quiet mornings after the rain, in messages that don't need answers, in the simple act of saying, I still care, even if you never say it back. The morning of the baby shower arrived with sunlight that felt too gentle, too kind for the heaviness she carried inside. She woke early, the house still quiet. For a moment, before memory caught up, everything seemed perfect. The smell of baked pastries, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the steady rhythm of a new day. Then she remembered. Today, she would find out if her sister was coming. The thought stayed with her as she moved through the morning. The sound of tissue paper crinkling, the slow arranging of flowers in glass jars, the delicate touch of pastel ribbons. Everything she did was careful, maybe too careful, as if the steadiness of her hands could convince her heart to stay calm. Guests began to arrive one by one. The house filled with laughter and the soft chatter of voices, the kind that overlapped gently like ripples on water. Friends hugged her, complimented the decorations, touched her belly with warmth and wonder. She smiled. She laughed at the right times. She thanked them, offered cake, nodded when they said how beautiful everything looked. But every few minutes, her eyes flickered toward the door. There was a chair near it, placed just in case. Not part of the arrangement, not decorative, just there, waiting. She told herself it didn't matter if her sister came. She said it out loud once, even, when a friend asked if her family would be joining. I think everyone's busy, she'd said, the words too casual, too smooth to be true. But her heart, her foolish, hopeful heart, waited anyway. Each knock, each car that slowed outside made her chest tighten. Each time she told herself, this could be her, and each time, it wasn't. By late afternoon, the room was filled with joy she couldn't fully touch. People were taking photos, hands full of confetti and ribbons. Someone started a small game that made everyone laugh until tears formed in their eyes. She smiled through it all, a practiced kind of smile, until the noise blurred into a single soft hum. She felt the moment passing. The day that was supposed to celebrate new beginnings slowly closing, leaving one empty chair untouched. When everyone finally began to leave, they hugged her again, promising to visit soon, their warmth sincere but temporary. And then, Like sunlight fading at dusk, the laughter disappeared with them. Silence filled the house, the kind of silence that feels like an echo. She walked back to that chair by the door, sat down, her hands resting on her lap. Around her, balloons leaned against the walls, tired from floating all day. Wrapping paper lay crumpled near the gifts, the smell of cake still faint in the air. That's when she saw it, the unopened box near the corner. The one she had set aside for her sister. It was small, wrapped in pale blue paper with a white ribbon. She had picked it carefully, imagining what it would feel like to hand it to her, to say without words, "I want us to be okay." She picked it up now, turned it over in her hands, then placed it gently back down. The room felt larger somehow, emptier. She thought about how strange it was, to prepare a space for someone who didn't come, and still feel grateful that you hoped they would. The sun had almost set when her phone buzzed. A single notification. She hesitated before picking it up. Her heartbeat quickened. For a second, she wanted to ignore it, to stay suspended in not knowing. Because once she looked, the hope would either break or bend. But she looked. "I'm sorry. I couldn't come. But I wanted to." Just 12 words. She read them twice, then a third time, her eyes softening with each pass. There was no explanation, no promise, no apology big enough to fix what had been broken. But still, it was something. A small, human thing. She leaned back in the chair, the phone resting in her hands. For the first time all day, her eyes closed. Tears came, quiet, unhurried, more like breathing than crying. They weren't tears of anger or even sadness. They were the kind that come when you finally stop pretending not to care. The message wasn't what she had hoped for. But it was more than she expected. It didn't heal the years between them. But it touched something inside, the part that still believed people can change in silence, in their own time. She looked again at the unopened gift, then at the message. And slowly, a thought took root. Maybe this is how love survives, not through grand reunions or perfect apologies, but through simple truths that arrive too late and still matter anyway. The last light of the day fell across the room, catching the silver thread of a balloon ribbon. It shimmered faintly before the shadows claimed it. She whispered into the stillness, not for anyone to hear. "It's okay." And maybe it was. Not in the way she had once imagined, but in the quiet way life sometimes allows, where disappointment and love sit side by side, neither winning, neither leaving. She stayed there until the light faded completely, holding her phone, the message glowing softly on the screen. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the start of remembering why she wanted it. The next morning, the air smelled of rain. The kind of morning that feels like the world is holding its breath. Soft, gray, and gentle enough to remember things you've tried to forget. She stood by the window, watching the water slide down the glass in thin, trembling lines. The baby shower decorations were gone now. The laughter, the voices, the music, all packed away. Only the silence remained. On the table lay the unopened box. Beside it, her phone, face down, and a blank piece of paper. She didn't remember sitting down or reaching for a pen, but soon her hand began to move. At first it was just her name, then a pause. Then more words, shaky and small. "Dear Mom and Dad," the letter wasn't planned. It wasn't even meant to be sent. But once she began, the words came like rain, soft, endless, unrestrained. She wrote about the years they lost, birthdays they missed, calls that turned into silence, the small apologies that never found their way out of anyone's mouth. She wrote about how she still kept the old photographs, even though the faces sometimes felt like strangers. She didn't accuse. She didn't explain. She just told the truth, the quiet, unglamorous kind. The truth that lives between love and disappointment. "I used to think healing meant getting answers," she wrote. "Now I think it just means learning to love people for who they are, not who you hoped they'd be." The words surprised her, not because they were profound, but because they felt like peace. like something she'd been chasing without realizing. She folded the paper gently, slid it into an envelope, and placed it beside the box. No address, no stamp, just there. Then she wrote another. This one to her sister. "Hey," it began. "I don't know what stopped you from coming. I want to say it didn't hurt, but it did. Still, I'm glad you messaged. I really am." She paused, staring at the half-filled page. Her fingers trembled slightly. "Maybe we don't know how to be sisters anymore," she continued. "But I think I'd still like to learn." When she finished, she placed that letter beside the first. 2 envelopes, 2 unspoken stories, 2 small pieces of her heart she wasn't ready to send, but needed to write. The act of writing didn't fix anything, but it did something quieter, more honest. It released the weight of what she'd been holding. It gave her permission to breathe again. Outside, the rain softened to a mist. The sky was pale and forgiving. She went to the nursery, still half-finished, and sat in the rocking chair by the window. The walls were painted a soft cream, the kind of color that felt safe. She closed her eyes and imagined her child's laughter filling the room someday, laughter untouched by the mistakes of the past. It was then she realized something simple. She didn't want to pass on her pain. She didn't want silence to be inherited. She wanted her child to grow up surrounded by words, kind ones, honest ones, the kind that heal instead of hide. The letters on the table would never be mailed, but maybe that wasn't their purpose. Maybe writing them was the act of saying goodbye. Not to her family, but to the part of herself that kept waiting for them to be different. Because sometimes healing doesn't look like reunion. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to reopen an old wound, and still loving what lives underneath the scar. She stood up, took the 2 envelopes, and slipped them into a small wooden box in the closet. The same box where she kept keepsakes, photos, dried flowers, a faded card from childhood, a private museum of the life she'd lived. Before closing the lid, she whispered softly, "I forgive you." "I forgive me." No audience, no reply. Just the quiet settling of her own heart. The sound of the rain faded completely now. Light filtered through the clouds, soft, uncertain, but real. She smiled. For the first time in a long while, it wasn't the practiced kind. It was the small, almost invisible kind, the kind that begins somewhere deep inside and doesn't need to be seen to exist. Later that day, she took the unopened box, her sister's gift, and placed it on a shelf near the nursery window. Not out of longing, but as a reminder that love, even unspoken, still has a place in her home. As she stood there, she thought of something she once read. Some letters are meant to stay unread, not because they don't matter, but because the person who wrote them already found their peace. And maybe that's what this was. Peace. Dressed as paper. She didn't send the letters. She didn't need to, because for the first time she realized forgiveness isn't something you give them. It's something you finally give yourself. The baby arrived on a Wednesday morning. The air was pale blue, the kind that smells like new beginnings. Everything after that day felt different. Softer somehow, as if the world had exhaled. She didn't remember much from the first few weeks. Only fragments. The slow rhythm of breathing, the creak of the rocking chair, the warmth of small fingers curling around hers. There was exhaustion. Of course, the kind that sank into the bones. But there was also peace. The kind that asked for nothing, explained nothing, just existed quietly between heartbeats. The house that once echoed with waiting now hummed with life. The silence that used to ache was now filled with tiny sounds, sighs, coos, soft laughter. Still, on certain evenings, she caught herself glancing at the shelf, at the box with the ribbon still tied. The unopened gift from her sister. She had stopped wondering what was inside, stopped replaying the baby shower or the messages, but something about that box always felt alive, like a heartbeat wrapped in paper. Then one morning, about 6 weeks after the baby was born, there was a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant. She opened it to find a small package on the doorstep. No name, no card, just a faint scent of lavender, the same scent their mother used to wear. Her hands trembled as she untied the string. Inside, folded carefully, was a hand-knitted baby blanket, cream-colored, with a pattern she knew by heart, her sister's way of stitching, uneven in the corners but made with care. She pressed it to her face and breathed in deeply. For a moment, everything blurred, not from sadness, but from something gentler, something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was something. A bridge made of thread and time and the things they didn't know how to say. She sat down on the couch, the baby asleep on her chest, and ran her fingers over the blanket. Every stitch felt like a word her sister couldn't write. Like, I thought of you. I wanted to be there. I'm trying. She smiled, the kind of smile that carries both ache and relief. In that moment, she understood something simple and quiet. Forgiveness doesn't always arrive in words. Sometimes it comes in gestures too small for anyone else to notice. A blanket, a scent, a memory of warmth returning, she whispered softly. Thank you, though there was no one in the room to hear it. The baby stirred slightly, pressing closer to her chest, as if understanding the calm that had settled in the air. Outside, sunlight poured through the window, golden, slow, forgiving. She thought back to the letters in the wooden box, to the words she'd written but never sent. Maybe they didn't need to be mailed after all. Maybe they had done their work. Opened the door just enough for love to find its way back in. She stood and carried the baby to the nursery. The walls glowed in the morning light. She spread the knitted blanket gently over the crib and watched as it settled, a small wave of softness against the cotton sheets. It fit perfectly, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to hold on to the ache. It didn't disappear, not entirely, but it no longer owned her. Sometimes healing doesn't look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like this. A quiet acceptance that love, even fractured, can still find its way home, she whispered, half to herself. Maybe that's how love returns, not in grand gestures, not in words, but in the smallest, softest ways. The baby shifted again, a tiny sound escaping her lips. Somewhere between a sigh and a dream, she smiled. And in that stillness, she realized this was forgiveness. Not a conversation, not a confession, just a release, a letting go that left room for tenderness to return. Outside, the world kept moving, traffic humming, birds calling, life unfolding. But inside that small room, time slowed, a mother and her child. A blanket stitched with unspoken love, and the scent of lavender drifting through the air, like memory, like home. She didn't need her sister's words anymore. Because forgiveness, she realized, wasn't something received. It was something chosen. And that choice, quiet, personal, unseen, was enough. Morning arrived quietly, the way forgiveness often does, without announcement, without sound. Just the slow spread of sunlight across the nursery wall, touching everything with a kind of grace. The baby slept soundly, her tiny hand curled around the edge of the lavender-scented blanket. The same one her sister had made, the same one that had somehow carried years of silence, distance, and love all at once. She sat in the rocking chair, the floor creaking softly beneath her. For a long time she just watched. The light moved gently over the crib, the air still and golden, as if the whole world was taking a deep breath. There was no need to reach for her phone. No impulse to check for messages, or to wonder what might come next. The ache that used to hum quietly in her chest had softened into something else. Not joy, exactly, but peace. She thought about her sister, not as the person she used to resent, but as someone who had been lost in her own way too, someone who had been trying to find her way back, thread by thread. It struck her then. Maybe forgiveness isn't about closing a wound, but learning to live where it once was. Learning to trace the scar gently, without pain. She leaned back, her eyes drifting to the window. Outside, the world shimmered with ordinary beauty. The sway of a tree, the hum of morning. It all felt familiar, yet newly alive. There had been so many years of waiting, for words, for reconciliation, for closure. But now, sitting in that sunlit room, she realized that closure isn't something given. It's something grown, quietly, like a seed that learns patience. Her heart didn't need answers anymore. It had learned the rhythm of stillness, the kind that doesn't erase the past, but lets it rest. The baby stirred, a soft sigh escaping her lips. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from the child's forehead. That simple touch, so small, so complete, felt like the continuation of something that began long before either of them could name it. Love, she thought, doesn't always stay loud. Sometimes it learns to whisper. Sometimes it becomes the quiet between heartbeats. Steady, forgiving, alive. The light settled fully across the room now, warm and unmoving. For once, she didn't feel like she was chasing it. It had found her. Here, in this stillness, in this moment of quiet understanding. She closed her eyes and let out a long, slow breath, the kind that feels like an ending and a beginning all at once. The light stayed. And for the first time in years, so did peace.